Welcome to Thisdaylive, the Sunday talk show, where we discuss all things political, bringing you the top stories locally, nationally, and from around the world. I'm Ruben Abate, and Thisdaylive begins now. I'd like to welcome today's panelists, Chike Ogea, former Commissioner of Information, Delta State, Wale Gomez, Public Affairs Analyst, and Professor Bola Akinterewa, Director General, Bulitac Center for International Diplomacy and Strategic Studies. Gentlemen, welcome to Thisdaylive. Good to see you again this week. Let's begin here in Nigeria, where President Muhammadu Buhari on Thursday sent to the Senate for approval a proposal to borrow 29.96 billion offshore to fund critical projects. The president told the lawmakers that the loans will fund 39 emergency projects in the power, agriculture, and transport sectors, asking them to request further details from Zainab Ahmed, the Minister of Finance, Budget, and National Planning. Several groups, including the Nigerian Economic Summit Group and the Employers Consultative Association, expressed concern about the federal government's borrowing plan. Meanwhile, chairman of the Senate Committee on Local and Foreign Debt in the 8th Senate, Senator Shehu Sani, gave reasons why the 8th Senate turned down the federal government's $30 billion loan request, stating that the rejection was to save Nigeria from sinking into the dark gully of a perpetual debt trap. According to Sani, who is now the director at the African Center for Peace and Development, the 9th Senate should be cautious so that the country is not, quote, recolonized by creditor banks, unquote. So this is the issue that we have before us, but we all know that in terms of government revenue, there isn't enough to fund the budget for 2020. And whether government likes it or not, well, maybe it has to borrow. So why is that the case? And in any case, the people on the fiscal side, on the monetary side, they say, well, Nigeria's debt to GDP ratio is still very low, and that Nigeria can borrow more, and that we haven't borrowed enough. But here you have some socialists, if you don't mind, saying that, look, you can't keep borrowing. You know, can we just rev up productivity? So where do you stand in this matter? Well, you are a businessman. You deal with figures. So let me start with you, Chike. Okay, you prefer entrepreneur.
I'm a lawyer. Everything else comes after that.
Yeah.
But seriously, the issue of the debt is something that is dear to me. Because in 1999, that was how I went into government. I went in as an assistant to one of the most quintessential administrators and governance experts Nigerian can ever have. I talk
Philip
about
Asiodu?
That's right. And he, at that time, had a tripartite assignment. He was the chief economic advisor. He was the de facto minister for national planning, and he was also the chief debt negotiator of the country. As at that time, I remember, it was said that the military had not spoken to the multilaterals, and we didn't even know how much we were owing. It was all compounded interest and everything. They just were flinging different figures at us. So I remember those early days, he came in, did a lot of shuttle work between Washington, The Hague, you know, World Bank, and all those things. And in fact, that's how Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala got involved, even while she was still in Washington. And she was part of the team, and they kept on moving around. Eventually, they found a figure, and they commenced serious talks. And like you know, by 2007 or thereabout, because the foundation was laid then, the debt was paid off, and we actually became a debt-free country. And if you ask me, I think that's one of the greatest legacies the Obasanjo regime left. That's not to say debt is a bad thing in itself, like you said, because if you are taking debt to produce, to build critical infrastructure that will pay for itself, it's a different ballgame. But when you are taking debt to finance recurrent expenditure, and we all know our recurrent expenditure is about 80%, to finance consumption, as long as we are still a primary export-oriented market, whatever it is we produce, we send out in raw form. We can't put any secondary value to it. Our crude oil is taken out, then we import it as refined petroleum product, So you can see all the same thing with cocoa, same thing with everything we do. So as far as I'm concerned, I think we should sit at home and look more at how we can become a secondary exporter of our goods, how we can add value, how we can profit from the value chain. Then we can take limited debt. Because I think it was about 7 billion or so when this administration came in.
No, 10.58.
10.58, okay. Now we're talking about going almost to 70. I mean, do we want to leave our children to be perpetual debt slaves? I think this, so if you ask me, I think Shehu Sani, it's not a matter of being a socialist. I totally agree with what he's saying, and I think we must begin to think about the successive generations coming after us.
Gomez, I would like to have your views on this. I mean, if the experts insist that debt to GDP ratio is still something we can manage, and that borrowing is not a problem, and that in any case it's not a sin to borrow, and that we have not even borrowed enough, and in any case we have a finance bill which is expected to bring more revenue. So, I mean, are we not just being sentimental, emotional, when we criticize the federal government saying we need to borrow to fund either budget deficit or the budget itself?
I want to come from this angle. Let's start with figures of facts. When this government started in 2015, they borrowed were $10.32 billion in debt. As of today, we're $22 billion in debt. When when Jonathan Obasanjo went out, we were in zero, which means there's been an escalation of borrowing by us, which is something that is worrying because we cannot see what the money is being used for. It's just say, okay, we want to borrow this much, let's go.
No, that won't be fair.
All right.
We can't see what the money is being used for.
I don't want to ask you a question, but I can't see what, apart from...
The president himself said that constituency funding...
I was going somewhere.
He couldn't understand that.
No. But it won't be fair to say we can't see what the money is being used for. Maybe we should remove our glasses so that we can see clearly.
We can't see clearly now. Because let me tell you, where I'm going is this. Where I'm going is the fact that when you borrow this level of money, there should be a multiplier effect to that. If you're borrowing 114% increase from 2014-15 to date, and you have to produce what? But if you are using it to produce or to do things that will create employment for the citizenry, we will see it. It's not rocket science. It's a statement of fact that we are not feeling the effect of the borrowing. That's number one. Then what happens? Before we start even thinking about borrowing, there have been some money that's been collected, seized from people, that the EFCC and all this stuff. Why can't they use some of that money to augment the budget so that we borrow less? The way it's going now, they want us to go and borrow and want to borrow, and we want to see. We're looking at the effect of this borrowing. We're going. Personally, I cannot see the effect of it.
But I'm surprised. The two of you are entrepreneurs. And business people, when you talk to them, they say to do business, you must borrow.
No, you can use
There's nothing wrong with borrowing.
If you have your capital, you can use your capital. You don't have to borrow. Because when you borrow, you're adding interest expense into your operation.
He made, sorry, Prof, just before we go to the Prof, he made a very important point. How come that aspect of the country is so opaque? We never know. Nobody gives an account of what was recovered, how it is being used, and we hear EFCC is recovering all these billions and billions and billions. They are seizing houses, they are seizing hotels, they are seizing all this massive infrastructure, and we don't know what is being done with it.
What all this money?
Well, Prof, let me come to you. There's an international dimension to it. I mean, in the course of the week, some Nigerians went to IMF, World Bank to go and protest You know, the video is available on social media. They say, don't lend a penny to Nigeria because the money will be stolen, right? And then, of course, there's Shehu Sani who is saying that, look, this is another form of recolonization. What do you think, in addition to some of the points that have been made?
Sonny Shehu and our compatriots protesting, they cannot be more correct. You see, in international relations, first of all, indebtedness is an instrument of control of the poorer member states of the international community. They encourage countries to take loan. Now, when you take loan, in this case, the creditors are regularly in the position to control how you spend the money given under various pretexts. So, taking loan is empowering the creditor to have direct access into what falls within the exclusive competence of the country taking the loan. The second point is that when you are indebted, Wale and Shiki rightly pointed out earlier on, when you take a loan and you direct the use of the loan for purposes of growing the economy, purposes of manufacturing, in this case, it will be productive loan. But in a situation whereby, for instance, you have a loan to be incurred for purposes of recurrent expenses, then we are enslaving ourselves. Now, if, for instance, under President Buhari, he took off with $10.32 billion as at 2015, and the loan had now increased by 114%. By the second quarter of this year, Wale told us very rightly, we are already, we already have about 22.08 billion debt to settle. You now want to add 29.96 or about 30 billion to it, meaning that you have over 50 billion. Then the efforts, the pains that an Okonjo-Iweala suffered, the efforts of an Olusegun Obasanjo now pleading with the international community, negotiating in such a way that our debt was reduced from about 28-29 billion by that time. Now, what was written off, what we eventually settled, we are now coming back to lay a foundation of indebtedness for the next level, quote and unquote. No, I think that that is not good enough. Last third point is this. For as long as we take foreign loans, for as long as the creditors assist us to take loan, the likelihood of Nigeria having an independentist disposition to develop, to grow, would be remote. You see, let Nigerians accept to suffer for once on the basis of self-reliance. These loans are never taken to ensure, to increase self-reliance.
Well, Prof, and this on is that point about self-reliance, we need to take a short break now here on Thisdaylive. We'll be right back. Don't go away. It's still Thisdaylive, the Sunday talk show. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Thisdaylive, the Sunday talk show, here on the Arise News channel. Still with me in the studio, I have Chike Ogea, former Commissioner of Information, Delta State, Wale Gomez, a public affairs analyst, and Professor Bola Akintenuwa, Director General at the Bolitak Center for International Diplomacy and Strategic Studies. Well, gentlemen, we're back, and we're still on Thisdaylive, this Sunday talk show. But let's go to another Nigerian issue and reflect on it. Former governors are drawing billions as retirement allowances from state governments, while pension arrears of retired workers in Nigeria have continued to accumulate, completely unpaid. On Wednesday, different groups, including the Civil Society Legislative Advocacy Center, commended the Zamfara State House of Assembly for abolishing the pension law for former governors, their deputies, as well as former speakers and their own deputies as well. The Zamfara Assembly had earlier on Tuesday repealed a law that approved different hefty allowances for former political office holders, a development that came a few days after former governor of Zamfara State, Abdulaziz Yari, in a leaked letter to the state government, requested Governor Bello Matawale to pay him his 10 million naira monthly upkeep allowance, including arrears. Though there are exceptions in some states that do not have such laws which approve outrageous payments, former governors are being pampered in most of the states in Nigeria. This development has caused uproar across the country, with many people saying top politicians who have access to all privileges were taking more at the detriment of civil servants and other servants, other citizens as well. So this is it. You have in many of these states, including Delta State, where you served, Chike.
Delta State is a state in Nigeria, so why should it be different?
Yeah, but I'm just saying, including just identifying your state and putting it on the spot.
No, really.
Persons who serve either as governors or as speaker or as deputy governors, they leave office, and for the rest of their lives, they collect rent. Money that could be otherwise more judiciously applied. And this is not supposed to be some compensation for good performance. We all know that these are persons who were, mostly in terms of public assessment considered incompetent or disappointing or ineffective. And yet they remain a parasite, collecting rent from the state. Gomez, I know in your own state that's not the case. Or is it the case in your state too?
In Ogun State. I don't know about my state.
but I'm sure about that.
We are sure about that.
And Prof, your own state too is guilty as charged.
But let's come.
I'm sure it's the same thing in your state.
Are you very sure? No, go and investigate.
We don't do things like that in Ogun State.
You're sure?
Yeah,
No, we have the Ogun standard.
we have standards.
I like that.
But let's come in here. If the Constitution, if the law says that they're entitled to it, if the law says that.
Entitled to collect rent from the state for life.
If it's in the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria.
It's not in the Constitution.
If
it's the state houses of assembly.
Yeah,
if they are passed that into a law,
it becomes a
then
law.
it becomes a law.
That's
so
right.
whether they're incompetent, whether they're useless, whether they're horrible, it does not matter. It's the law says they have to be paid. Yes, and I don't see even any reason for this. It's just that the moral end of it is what's not really good. The moral end of it is the fact that the country is bleeding, and we should be able to assist the country in living well. And that these payments are part of the income that is needed by the country or the country to survive. So that is my own point of view on that.
I agree with you, but the way I look at it, it's a bit different. Like you rightly said, the law is a law. Whether it's a good law, it's a bad law, it's the law and it should be obeyed. Now, secondly, why all this? Why did we get this situation? Because of Zamfara State. Yeah. And don't forget what happened in Zamfara State is really an aberration. Why? Because there was no continuation of a party. Yeah. So the new party that has come in, now part of, like we always know, whenever there's a change in leadership or of one party to the other, I think part of the strategy is for the new party to discredit the old party and make it look like they were not doing anything.
No, hold on. Isolate the issue.
I'm going somewhere. So the point I'm making is simple. I think this whole problem goes to the root of our democracy.
Yeah.
How come the state assemblies are an appendage of the governor? That is where I think the real problem is. Because there's hardly any state in Nigeria that the assembly will be able to look at the governor and throw that kind of bill back at him when he brings it. So until we get to that kind of situation, where we have a situation where a state assembly can be independent, we can never come out of this kind of situation, I promise you. It's a pity. It's not what the country needs as we speak, because the country, like we rightfully said, we need money. We need money, and we need to get every single money we have. And then, more importantly, I think the moral burden on this issue, where we have pensioners all over the place that cannot receive their money, pensioners that cannot get paid for their years of toil to their fatherland. They are old and infirm, and you can't give them their little entitlement, and yet we keep giving out these big, bogus monies to these governors. Obviously, that, to my mind, is not something that we should be doing. Well, now, whether we should take this thing back to the Constitution, after all, we're a federation, and legislate upon it from the federal, but in that case, we'll again be abusing the same constitutionalism that people like me argue for every day. Because whether we like it or not, a federation is supposed to be, you know, clapping with two hands, where you have the states and you have the federal structure. So the federal government should never be, you know, lording it over the state government. So, you know.
Prof,
yes.
I come to you. See, we are in a dilemma here. Should a person who was elected to public office to serve in that position, and then remain a parasite onto the state for the rest of his life? The kind of things we're talking about, these guys collect as much as 120 million, some of them up to 300 million per annum. Not to talk of vehicles that are changed every 4 years, not to talk of salary for life. I mean, if we keep having in many of these states, governors changing, deputy speakers changing every 4 years, I mean, the state will be paralyzed. Shouldn't every other state repeal such laws that exist in their states? And why do we have politicians who get into important positions who don't have means of livelihood? If a man has been governor, he should go back to his profession. He should have a second address. He should not become a parasite onto the state. But I don't know what you think. Because Chike is justifying it. He's saying the law is the law.
No,
what kind of law is that?
I'm just saying that the law is what it is.
No, the law should be repealed.
Yes, and until it is changed. I agree with you. But I told you the reasons why there might be a problem with these laws being changed. Because these assemblies are mere appendages to the government house.
We can argue that all of these laws should be repealed across Nigeria. If you go and serve in public, go back to your job. Don't become a parasite, collecting rent from Nigeria.
I do not belong to the same school of thought with Wale and Chike. On the one hand, we can argue that law is law. But we should differentiate between the second law. Law is law. The second law, under it, we have what we call obnoxious laws. They might have been promulgated, all right? They might have been codified, but the bitter truth is that for as long as a law is obnoxious, they need to be repealed immediately. If you say, I'm coming...
subjective. Obnoxious to who, Prof?
Hold on, I'm coming. The law is meant for
common
the
sense
people.
and good conscience.
Exactly.
No.
But definitely not to the recipient.
No, please, hold on.
So it becomes subjective.
The law
I'm
is
talking to you
made-
as a lawyer. That's
The law
all.
is made by man for man.
Exactly.
All right? The man for whom the law is made, we need to sit down and look at it. For instance, why did the people of Nigeria combat Decree 2, Decree 4? Is Decree 4 not law? Was it not promulgated? Mm-hmm. But by the time the people for whom...
Some people died under Decree 4.
Yes, but the moment people now decided that, look, this law is not in our interest, even though it had been promulgated, they began to fight it. Now, a law is in the making to fight, to enslave social media, They talk about hate speech. Now, the nature of hate speech itself. Hate speech, we are not saying it is good. But the moment you know that this type of crime, you are not prescribing death penalty for that. People are now saying, no, this one will not be acceptable. So that's to let you know that law itself can be law when it is acceptable to the people. In this case, any infringement, all right, of such a law can now warrant punishment. But you see, like Ruben rightly pointed out, it's not a question of moral issue alone. Where is the justice? Where and why will a politician, you are elected for 4 years, then on the basis of just 4 years, you say you are entitled to gratuity or severance package. Severance package, I will agree. But pension, for what? For what? The law made under Badamasi Babangida was that you must have at least worked for 10 years, right, in the public service to be entitled. Probably 5 years for gratuity. But in this case, you know, the nature of politics in Nigeria is well understood. And that is why people like Philip Asiodu will live long and well. He argued long time ago, I think that should be in the late 1990s and early 2000s. He said that if we want to address the problem of corruption in Nigeria, if we want the polity to be largely predicated on honesty of purpose and for us to have good governance, he said, or he recommended that we should not make political governance attractive. Now, for instance, it was during his time, on the basis of his contribution, that people now came up with some suggestion that why should we be paying legislators? Now, let them work either on the basis of how many sittings they're having, and so on and so forth.
Prof, on that note, we need to go on a break. We'll be right back. It's still This Day Live, the Sunday talk show. Don't go away. Welcome back to This Day Live, the Sunday talk show, here on the Arise News channel. Still with me in the studio, I have Chike Ogea, former Commissioner of Information, Delta State, Wale Gomez, Public Affairs Analyst, and Professor Bola Akintenuwa, Director General, Bolitac Center for International Diplomacy and Strategic Studies. Now, let's go to London. We've been in Nigeria for a while. So, to the United Kingdom, where on Friday, a man was shot and killed by armed police at London Bridge in the British capital after several people were stabbed in what authorities are treating as a terrorist incident. Well, now the Islamic State group is claiming that the London Bridge attacker was one of its fighters, the Islamic State. In an Arabic text, the statement claimed the responsibility and said it was in response to calls to target citizens of countries that are part of the United States coalition. The group did not provide any evidence to support the claim. The man named by the United Kingdom police as a London Bridge attacker, 28-year-old Usman Khan, was convicted in 2012 of terrorism offenses and released in December 2018 on license, which meant he had to meet certain conditions or face recall to prison. Khan had been convicted as part of an Al-Qaeda-linked group that was accused of plotting to target major sites, including Parliament, the US Embassy, and individuals, including the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who was then the Mayor of London, also the Dean of St. Paul's Cathedral in London, and 2 rabbis. So we have this situation where you have the report of violence on the London Bridge, terror attack. The gentleman who ended up being killed was even wearing a horse, terror vest. But nothing happened eventually. Some persons were killed, persons were injured. but there was prompt response on the part of citizens and also the police. And the mayor of London has had cause to praise the citizens who tried to help and also the police who tried to help. The knife attacks have become a major concern, in the United Kingdom, particularly also among young people, young students, forcing the government to introduce some measures to provide extra security in schools. And now you have this occasional incident of knife attacks and security. Boris Johnson, as part of his proposal to the electorate, intends to pay more attention to security, recruit more policemen, and invest more in security. But it looks like these terror attacks, this insecurity challenge is all over the world. It looks like it's the entire world that is under siege, whether you are in Nigeria or you are in Afghanistan or you are in Syria or you are in Bolivia, anywhere, in any part of the world. Let me start with you, Prof.
You see, the mayor of London is called Sadiq Khan.
Yes.
The attacker is called Usman Khan. Now, I ask myself...
What's the connection?
Yes, I try to find out if the issue of terrorism cannot be traced to origin. I'm looking at it from the perspective of either sociology of crimes or from polemology. This attacker, Usman Khan, was sentenced to 16 years of imprisonment in 2012. For one reason or the other, last year, he was released. And Boris Johnson himself had argued that, look, it is not good enough to give freedom to this type of hardened criminals. So when I look at Usman Khan and Sadiq Khan, I know they are likely to have the same origin. And I try to raise the issue to say, why are we having terrorism of this type in London?
Is it? Prof. Sadiq Khan has been a very responsible mayor of London, and it may not be quite right to take a Trumpian review of his tenure and personality and contributions.
Well, I'm not saying you are not right, but I'm not wrong in the way I'm looking.
Yeah, because you are relying on ethnicity and name.
I am coming. You see,
and tagging and profiling him.
You asked us one question. You raised the issue of knife. Now, you cannot travel to any major cities saying you are carrying bombs or elements of bomb making. You will be caught. So people who prepare for terrorism nowadays, they don't need all those hardened approaches to terrorism. What they do now, all right, they travel free, they don't carry any luggage, but the terroristic, attack is already in their cerebrum there. So, please, this terrorist began his attack, we are told, in the conference of the University of Cambridge. And the theme of the conference is also on how to rehabilitate prisoners. Okay? So the attacker was there already. Now, he went out. Was he in possession of knife when he was at the conference? Please, you see, we should be concerned about how to deal squarely with this mania of terrorism. It's changing. When terrorism started, they started with a letter and parcel bombs. That's how it started. Before it degenerated into skyjacking, hijacking, and so on and so forth. But now, is taking a new form, in which case you least expect the use of knife. So I think that as it is, when we talk about globalization, globalization is not just an instrument of recolonization through ICT, but I think if we want to really put an end to this type of attack, we should no longer talk about integration of peoples. No, let integration be limited to materials, to technologies. But integration of people, where you say you move from one country to the other and you go and settle in another place, I don't subscribe to it anymore. And that is why, for instance, when you did ask me here on this platform, morning show, about xenophobia, I am saying that you can only prevent collective actions, collective aggression. But where you have one person, two people acting, operating individually, please, when they attack, the aggression is in his mind. There's very little you can do on that.
Let me come to you. What do you think?
From
Dealing with crime, I mean, this must be a major campaign issue now in the United Kingdom.
You see, when you look at it, the basic fundamentals of the United Kingdom electioneering campaign has been divided into two sections. The Labour Party, the leader of the Labour Party, is seen to be, how do I call it, anti-Semitic. Whereas the other guy, Johnson, is seen as pro. And when I saw the program yesterday, it scared me because I'm looking at it from a political dimension. It's going to change the landscape of how this election is going to go. A lot of Britons were actually reducing the effect of, how do I call it, terrorism around there, because it hasn't happened for a while now. Now it's happening, and they will now need someone to nip it in the bud.
Precisely.
Now, how that's going to be done, that is what's going to change the landscape of this election. I look at it more of a political issue because terrorism is, like you said, is everywhere now. Is the power. But one beautiful thing I noticed yesterday was the prompt approach by the police to nip this in the bud.
Maybe also by citizens.
And they really took charge. If it were in our country, people have taken off.
Where is that your country?
Nigeria.
Oh, okay. No, I needed to be sure.
No. If it were my country, Nigeria, the country I love so much, they will have taken off. They will not. We're not that. The action yesterday was really because they didn't know there might be a lot of them just killing people around the whole place. But because they saw the action that was taken yesterday, immediate response by the police. That is what's called security architecture. Because every spot in England has camera manned by police. So immediately those things were happening, they took action and they got rid of that guy. So we should learn from them that we should plan.
Yeah, the people of Nigeria
should plan. We should learn from what happened now. Because let's give one example. This had happened in, let's say, Marina, Broad Street, or whatever. Something like this. What would have happened? We don't have cameras. We don't have anything. We're just walking around aimlessly.
Well, Chike, quickly, before we go on another break, are there lessons to be learned here, as Gomez is pointing out?
Walid, I'm surprised that they are reacting this way and all of that. For me, I think this has been happening in the advanced world for a long time. Like he rightly said, they have the technology to back it, and they have the willpower to curb the kind of terrorism that has become a monster worldwide. Yes, it's going to be a political issue, and it will define the elections, because the left side now is saying, no, don't release these people. Let them spend, if you give them 20 years, they should spend the 20 years there. And the other side is saying, no, they should come out. The essence of paying for your crime is rehabilitation and correction, so that they can get you back into society. But the truth is that we are dealing with such hardened beasts. I don't call these people human beings, as far as I'm concerned. You know, people that just willfully take innocent lives, people that have done nothing to you.
Just kill them.
Just kill them in cold blood for nothing because of some belief you have in your head or whatever. You know, that doesn't make sense to me. Then coming back home, like you said, yes, and the whole world is open to this kind of terrorism. We're a victim of it. Of course, our level of technology.
On that note of a victim, we'll take another short break here on the Arise News channel. And we'll be right back. It's still the Live, the Sunday talk show. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Thisdaylive, the Sunday talk show here on the Arise News channel. Still with me, I have Chike Ogia, former Commissioner of Information, Delta State, Wale Gomez, Public Affairs Analyst, and Professor Bola Akintenewa, Director General of the Bolitag Center for International Diplomacy and Strategic Studies. Okay, we've been in Nigeria, we've gone to the UK. Now let's go to the United States. A U.S. congressional panel, the Judiciary Committee, if I may be specific, has given President Donald Trump 1 week to say whether his legal counsel intends to introduce evidence and call witnesses in upcoming impeachment proceedings that could lead to formal charges of misconduct within a few weeks, where he also has the option of appearing himself. The Democratic-led House Judiciary Committee, which is due to begin a consideration of possible articles of impeachment against Trump this week, sent a 2-page letter to the president, setting a deadline of 5 p.m. Eastern Time on December the 6th for the President's Counsel to specify intended actions under the committee's impeachment procedures. The procedures set out rules by which the president can call witnesses, introduce evidence, and make presentations. Panel Democratic Chairman Gerald Nadler set the same deadline for Republican lawmakers on the committee to notify him about intended witnesses and evidence, and scheduled a December 9th meeting to consider the matter. So here we are in the United States. President Donald Trump continues to complain about witch hunt. He continues to talk about presidential harassment. He continues to say that the people who have testified so far and made depositions are never Trumpers and that they are after him. He's been having meltdown on Twitter, but it does look like the impeachment inquiry that began with closed-door hearings in the House of Representatives, followed by open hearings where 12 witnesses gave, depositions, now has gone to the stage where the matter has been referred from the House Intelligence Committee to the House Judiciary Committee to draw up articles of impeachment. But he's been given the opportunity twice now. First, by Nancy Pelosi, the House Speaker, when he started attacking Mari Yovanovitch on Twitter to come before the House Committee to defend himself if he so wished. And now the same offer has been given by the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Gerald Nadler, to say, look, you have an option to either defend yourself or send a counsel, as other presidents in similar situations did in the past. Andrew Johnson and also, I think, Bill Clinton. Yeah. Both of whom were impeached, they were not removed. Yeah. Nixon also faced a similar situation where Nixon resigned before he could be impeached. But the whole issue is, would Donald Trump be removed? He seems to have the advantage of the numbers in the Senate.
If you ask me, I'll just say this quickly so they can discuss it. What really made, what I found funny was that, they asked him to come on a date he's supposed to be at some NATO conference.
But he can send his counsel.
That's what I'm going to say. And of course, the next thing Trump does, typical of Trump, he started tweeting, calling the American assembly that they are enemies of NATO, the Congress, exactly. They're enemies of NATO, and see what they are doing at this time. They don't want me to go for NATO. And like you rightly said, nobody's even asking him to come. Send a counsel. Yeah. And of course, you have that option to come. But the truth is that, Trump will play his shenanigans out till the end. And nobody knows. I tell you, it's up in the air because since that impeachment has to go to the Senate, where, of course, they have a overwhelming majority, the Republicans, I doubt if it will be removed. But I think a great a great amount of Americans will not mind Trump leaving that presidency.
Yeah, but the
Because,
Democrats also need to be careful so that it doesn't backfire. Gomez?
I don't understand how it's going to backfire because the one thing about America that I love so much is the fact that it's a processed country. It's a country of process. It seems Trump has forgotten that whatever he can say, he can tweak, he can do anything, he still has to follow the process. And in the long run, the process will take its course. Like you said, he could be impeached, but it might not be removed under certain conditions. Now, like I keep predicting, if the Senate were to do the vote on this program, on this stuff, on a secret ballot, Trump will be removed. But if it's
strong approval among Republicans.
Yeah, but there's still some
up
that
to
are
about 68%.
There are still some that are hiding behind the curtain. They want it to be, if it's an open ballot, then Trump will stay.
Prof, quickly, in a minute.
Quickly. Impeachment, removal, out of the question. You see, the major problem now is that the moment he is impeached, is permanently on record. Article 2, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution grants the president the power, to pardon. But with the exception of impeachment. So a president can pardon in all cases, but the only exception is impeachment. Now, if he is impeached, he will now be on record now to have been convicted. His generation...
Convicted or indicted?
Indicted. Indicted. Following impeachment. So his record is permanently damaged, tainted. And that is most unfortunate.
And can be used
Well,
in campaign.
we'll take another story here in Africa. We'll go to Sudan. Sudan's transitional authorities approved a law late on Thursday to dismantle the regime of former President Omar al-Bashir, including the dissolution of his political party, the National Congress Party, and confiscation of all assets belonging to that party in response to a key demand of protesters that helped overthrow the Omar al-Bashir government in April. The law was passed during a joint meeting of Sudan's Sovereign Council and Cabinet that lasted several hours, during which the body also scrapped a law regulating women's dress and behavior. The Sudanese Professionals Association, which spearheaded the protest against al-Bashir, welcomed the law, saying it was an important step on the path to building a democratic civilian state. Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok further said on Twitter that the law was not an act of revenge, but was rather aimed at preserving the dignity of the Sudanese people. Prof, the National Congress Party of Omar al-Bashir has been dissolved, dismantled, its assets seized, property seized, right? Omar al-Bashir himself is in court facing charges of money laundering and corruption. Then the Public Order Act, which Omar al-Bashir put in place in 1992, has been abolished, giving freedom to women to wear whatever clothes they like, and also decriminalizing the consumption of alcohol. What do you think?
Perfectly in order. There is the principle of sanctity of agreements. Those who came to the streets to demonstrate, to protest against al-Bashir, one of the conditions for staying off the streets was that, one, anything of al-Bashir must be removed completely. And this was agreed to. It was one of the rationales for the composition of the present council. So in this case, if they came up with this type of law, I think it is consistent with the agreement reached with the professional protesters.
Well, the Sudanese Professionals Association is jubilating. There is a greater scope. Gomez, one comment on this, quickly.
Yeah, my only thing is to say that they're following their own law and they're happy that the law is taking its course. That's it.
Any comment?
This is a man that's been there for 30 years or so. And what they are trying to do, obviously, is to change the order. Everybody wants to go democratic.
And I hope that at the end of the day,
That's the only way.
Omar al-Bashir will be handed over to the International Criminal Court
right.
so that he can answer for his crimes against humanity and the genocide in Darfur and other parts of Sudan. You've been watching This Day Live, the Sunday talk show, here on Arise News. I'm Ruben Abate. From our entire team here in Lagos, it's bye for now, and thank you very much for watching. See you next week.